Hello and welcome to another video in Foundations of Maternal and Newborn Health. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the hypothalamus-pituitary axis. Hypothalamus-pituitary axis. So these are kind of scary medical jargon words, but we'll go through them and hopefully by the end of the video, it'll make a little bit more sense. So both the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland are parts of your brain. So the hypothalamus is this part right down here. So this is the hypothalamus. And the pituitary gland is this little sac that sits underneath the hypothalamus in your brain. So this is the pituitary. And this is a cross section of the brain. So your eyes would be over here. These would be your eyes over here, and this would be the back of your head, the back of your skull over here. So this is your brain from the side. So the hypothalamus kind of sits in the center of your brain and the pituitary just under it. And the hypothalamus acts as your body's sensor. So it tells your body if your heart rate's too high or too low, or your blood pressure's too high or too low, or if you're too hot or too cold. So your hypothalamus kind of senses whether there's something wrong with your body. And then it talks to your pituitary. So it sends signals to your pituitary right underneath it, and the pituitary talks to the rest of the organs in your body, or at least a lot of the organs in your body. And so the hypothalamus and the pituitary are really important in maintaining homeostasis, and we've kind of come back to this term of homeostasis throughout the endocrinology unit, but it's this idea of your healthy body state. And so the hypothalamus and the pituitary work together to maintain this homeostasis. So in today's video, we're just going to go over some of the organs that the hypothalamus and the pituitary talk to and how they help maintain this homeostasis. So the first organ that we'll talk about is the thyroid. So that's this organ here in red. So this is the thyroid. And we've talked about this in a previous video. The thyroid makes the hormones T3 and T4, and these help regulate metabolism. And so the pituitary can actually signal to the thyroid to tell it to make more thyroid hormone. And it does this by releasing thyroid stimulating hormone. Thyroid stimulating hormone. So that's also known as TSH. So the pituitary can secrete TSH into the bloodstream, and your thyroid, you can see here, is in the neck. And so the pituitary will release TSH into the blood, and it'll travel down from your brain and signal to your thyroid to produce more T3 and T4. So that's the thyroid. The other organ that we'll talk about is the breast. So this is the breast, and it's specifically the mammary glands of the breast. They've kind of been drawn in here in red. These are the mammary glands, and of course they produce milk. And so the pituitary can actually signal to the mammary glands by releasing prolactin. And prolactin causes the breast to make breast milk. So this causes the mammary glands of the breast to produce milk. So the pituitary controls the breast by releasing prolactin. The other gland that we'll talk about is the adrenal glands. So we may do a video on this. This is sort of less important for our purposes, but these are the adrenal glands. And they're sort of responsible for the fear response, So if you've ever been scared and your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure will go up, maybe your vision gets, a little smaller and you have a lot of energy. So this is known as kind of the fight or flight response, and it's created by the adrenal glands producing epinephrine. And norepinephrine. And so the adrenal glands, there's two. So we have one on each kidney. So these here in yellow, these are the kidneys. So the kidneys sit kind of in your back, and above them are these little adrenal glands on top of the kidneys. And so the pituitary also causes your adrenal glands to make more epinephrine and norepinephrine. And we won't talk about how it regulates that. It's less important for our purposes. So the last organ that we'll talk about, and arguably the most important for us, is the uterus and the ovaries. So the pituitary and hypothalamus actually talk to both of these sort of separate organs. So we have, of course, the uterus itself, and then also the ovaries, which are these round sacs here. So it also talks to the ovaries. So the ovaries are also an endocrine gland, so they make hormones too, and they make estrogen, and progesterone. And we'll talk about how estrogen and progesterone regulate the menstrual cycle in another video, but the pituitary controls the ovaries, and it tells the ovaries when to make more estrogen and progesterone by secreting luteinizing hormone or LH, and FSH, or follicle stimulating hormone. So when the pituitary makes luteinizing hormone or follicle stimulating hormone, again, like the thyroid or the rest of these signaling, the pituitary releases luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone into the blood, and that travels down to the ovaries, and the ovaries will start making more estrogen and progesterone. The pituitary also signals to the uterus, and it's actually more so the hypothalamus, but the hypothalamus pituitary signal to the uterus through oxytocin. So of course oxytocin causes labor, so this causes labor. It causes the uterus to contract, and we'll do a video on this process later, but the hypothalamus and pituitary are also responsible for producing oxytocin to induce labor. So the last thing that I wanted to cover in this video was sort of why it's important to know the hypothalamus pituitary axis. And there's a few reasons why knowing these hormones and what they do is important clinically. So firstly, it's helpful in diagnosis. So the first one's diagnosis. So if a patient or a client has an issue, let's say there's something wrong with their thyroid, we can measure the levels of these hormones within the blood, and we can try to pinpoint where the problem is, whether it's an issue with the thyroid or maybe there's an issue with the brain, and that can help us treat whatever problem they might be having. So knowing these pathways is helpful for diagnosing issues. And then the second one is treatment, or drugs, specifically. Drugs. So we talked in the pharmacology unit about agonists and antagonists. And if we know the signaling pathways of the hypothalamus pituitary axis and an issue that a client or patient might be having, we can use drugs to help address these issues. So for example, if we have a woman who's having issues producing breast milk, we can use drugs to actually induce prolactin expression in the woman, and that might help her produce breast milk. Other examples are drugs like Pitocin, which acts as an oxytocin agonist. It acts as a mimic of oxytocin, and that can help us induce or augment labor. We also have other drugs like tocolytics, and we'll talk about that in another video, but that can actually block this oxytocin to prevent labor from progressing. So using our knowledge of these different pathways can help us diagnose and treat problems if we know what's happening inside the body and we know what's wrong with the woman.